is Dr. Hollisa Alewine, and we're bringing to you some Torah tips. We're bringing you some very fundamental, basic, new to Torah, new to Shabbat tips. And if you're not new, if you just like to pick up a few more tips, then okay, feel free to listen in. Sometimes it is fun, to go back and revisit. What was that book that was so popular years ago? Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, it's good. It's good to go back to kindergarten sometimes to learn how to play nice, share your crayons. Don't rub that brown crayon down to the nub. Be a little more creative with your colors. But truly, some people, they decide they want to keep Shabbat. They've been reading, they've been studying, they've been praying, and they feel a conviction of the Holy Spirit that I think I need to start keeping Shabbat. And so often they just don't know where to start. And so what we're going to offer you in this program is some practical tips. And you say, hey, wait a minute, slow down. You're going too fast. I'm trying to write this down. You don't have to. You can just go and click on the video. There will be a link for you to click on, and you can download these little basic guides. There's going to be lots of books you can read out there to give you more in-depth information about the Shabbat. But these were meant, for beginners, for people who were just beginning to explore and say, okay, I'm going to do it. Now what do I do? You kind of get that, okay, Elohim, God, he ceased from his work on the seventh day, so I should probably do what he did, especially since he thought it was so important. It's like, right there at the beginning and the end of the Bible. But something wonderful does happen in the cool of the evening. We know that from the garden. And so with this particular program, we want to just show you how to have a Shabbatic Garden of Eden. Not Eden, Eden. Okay, I tried to make a pun and it didn't go well, but you get what I'm saying. In the cool of the evening, on Friday evening, something wonderful begins to happen. So let's think of it like a family garden. And we'll just pretend like we're the first family. Adam and Eve, imagine what their first Shabbat was like. Well, for you and your family, you might be planning that very first Shabbat. You might be anticipating that cool of the evening that the Creator has put you and your family in the garden to enjoy it, but also there to beautify it with your presence. Your being there in the garden is going to make the garden even more beautiful than it already is. Because, see, he's already planted eternal trees. He has put some things that stand in the garden forever. The enjoyment of the day, that's never supposed to stop. It's a commandment to enjoy the Shabbat. There's the holiness of the day that's different from the other days. We're told not to kindle a fire on this particular day, not to work at your occupation on this particular day, unless you're in a life-saving business. If you have a profession like nurse or doctor or law enforcement and lives depend upon you, then absolutely, you weigh that out. That's a heavier commandment. But if you have seniority, see if you can bargain around and get Shabbat off. Really important for beginners, and maybe the hardest thing for beginners is not necessarily recognizing that this is a Shabbat, but understanding that Scripture does not encourage buying and selling on this day. Commercial activity needs to stop. That's why it's a good idea to turn off your electronics, because they're constantly pushing ads on you. No matter where you go, if you just pull up your phone, you're going to get a text with an ad on it, right? But commercialism needs to stop. We know it's going to stop in the book of Revelation when Babylon the Great falls. Well, we want to get on board with that way before things start tumbling down, right? We want to get used to doing out without commercial activity long before, the hammer, kind of gets put to the nail on it. So that's kind of a not tree. There's to do things, in the trees, there's to do trees. There's fruit in this garden that's provided, and He's planted these trees to give us eternal enjoyment. But there's also some trees we shouldn't be planted in the garden. There's trees that we shouldn't be eating from in the garden. I call those the knots. The knot trees. So those trees are for the other 6 days of the week. So we've got these great eternal trees of enjoyment and holiness of the day. And it's going to bring out the beauty in your home. Remember, the foundation is Exodus 31:12. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "But as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you shall surely observe my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you." He is sanctifying you through the Shabbat. "Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you." It's not just holy to Him, it's something that you can participate in. You can also set it apart as holy. Now, whether you do or not makes no difference. It's a holy day. The only question is, will we make it holy? Will we agree with the Holy One that this day is holy? I agree with Him. I always want to agree with Him because I've been wrong too many times not to know He created me, He created everything, and therefore if He says the Shabbat's holy, I agree with Him. So we want to set this particular day aside. We don't want it to be like every other day. We don't want it to be like the other 6 days of the week. In particular, this is a day of gathering. We are a holy nation, a royal priesthood. And so no matter where you live on the earth, think of it, what does the scripture say? From the rising of the sun until the going down of the same, there's going to be a whole Shabbat around the world. There will always be people to keep the Shabbat around the world. He's gathering you to Him. He's sanctifying you. And so it's a great space of time for like-minded people to gather. But it starts at home. You're saying, okay, yeah, I get that. But let me figure out how to do this at home. So we're going to start landscaping this garden of Eden. We're going to start preparing this garden so that it's going to beautify your home. You're going to begin to feel the holiness of this set-apart day, and you're going to begin to enjoy what results when you set apart that day. So because it's a special day, you want to find special things to do. And you say, well, you're telling me that there's doing certain things I can't be doing on Shabbat. That's true. Find out what those are, right? Remember, the most important thing, remember ceasing from commercial activity, ceasing from your customary work, causing other people to work. You say, okay, I won't cook today. I'll go to the restaurant. No. Now you're making somebody else work on Shabbat. It says your manservant, your maidservant, and the stranger that is within your gates. So you don't want to make anybody else work on Shabbat either. So going to the restaurant, we're going to have to toss that one out. Maybe that's the way we did it in the old days, but a new way of thinking now, if you're going to enter into the Shabbat. But you can become very innovative. Of course, you're going to prepare your meals ahead of time. A lot of stuff you can just put in the freezer or put in the fridge, cook it on Friday morning, and then you eat off that. And what we have found is we often eat, an extra day or two. We make so much food. So we don't have to cook on Sunday, and sometimes we don't have to cook on Monday. We've got so many leftovers. But you want to find innovative, special ways of doing things that'll set it apart from the other 6 days of the week. And it's the example I gave on the tip sheet was, there's annual flowers and there's perennial flowers. When you plant the perennials, they'll always be there. But the annuals are just kind of the fun ones because you can go down to the garden shop and you can say, wow, I love those. I love the color of these. And you'll pick up those annuals, and Shabbat kind of offers you the opportunity. It's always going to bloom. It's going to be in perennial bloom. it's always going to be beautiful. But see, you have the opportunity to individualize it, to find something special this week, to brighten up, to bring those annual flowers to the table and say, hey, look, what's in bloom this week? Same thing with your foods. What's in season this week? We're big on farm to table nowadays. What's in season this week? Can my Shabbat table reflect what's coming in at the farmer's market? You got to watch those farmers markets, though, because they want to open up on Shabbat. You might have to talk to them, try to talk them into doing a different day. But special things, that's what you want to think about on Shabbat. Make it different from the other days of the week. This might be the day to bring out grandma's fine china or her tableware. If it's been in hiding in a hutch somewhere, for the last 6 years, take it out, clean it up. It'll be special. Think of it as like the opportunity to do Thanksgiving every week. That's what it feels like sometimes. You're doing all this work. It's like Thanksgiving every week. The china that I have at home, my mother bought the year I was born. And so she passed that on to me. And so every Shabbat, when we use that fine china, I can be very thankful just by looking at the china. It's a little chipped, there's parts of it that are wearing off. But when I look at that china, I remember the heritage of the word that she placed in me, and I can be grateful for her. And it connects me with her, even though, she's long passed into the garden. It connects me not just to the good times we enjoyed when that fine china was used, but it connects me to the heritage of faith that she passed on to me. So have some fun. You can have your own Shabbat collection of tableware if you would like. You can have special serving bowls. If you like candles, some people like 2 candles. One represents guard, and the other one represents remember, because we're told both to guard and to remember the Shabbat. And so one represents one and one represents the other. Now, other people will light a candle for each of their children, which is a pretty cool. Now, if you have a house full of children, you're going to have a house full of candles too, which can be really fun. But there's no, set requirement for how many candles. It's not even a commandment to light the candles. It's just a beautiful thing that beautifies the table, that creates the atmosphere. And it grew out of those times where they didn't have light switches. And so if they didn't light their candles before sundown on Shabbat, then they couldn't light their candles, because remember, there's a commandment not to kindle a fire. And that's part of making it special. That's why you're cooking your food ahead of time, so you don't have to turn the oven on. So you don't have, it says bake what you're going to bake, boil what you're going to boil, set it aside, and then enjoy it on Shabbat. So you don't want to bake and boil on Shabbat. But again, beautify your table, beautify your home on Shabbat. You can buy all sorts of, not just tableware, like real tableware, but you can even get paper plates now, fancy paper plates. They might have grapes, like the pomegranates, palm trees, the fruits of the land of Israel. If you can find those sorts of things, bright colors, kids love bright colors. And you can spend a lot of money. You can go to Judaica shops and find, matched pieces of things. Spend a whole lot of money. And if you want to, go ahead. But it can also be fun to just go to the garage sales and pick up a piece here and there, and to begin to assemble your kind of eclectic Shabbat tableware. Just combing through those auctions or yard sales, you can pick things up inexpensively. So Shabbat can be very beautiful for pennies if you don't mind and you enjoy that. Like I said, whoever said an orchard was only one kind of fruit tree? Plant all kinds of trees in there. They don't all have to be orange trees. Those pieces may not be new, but they're new to you. You're going to look like you know what you're doing. You're going to look like a real interior designer when you put all that stuff together. And I know years and years ago, I found a really beautiful green glass collection that I loved. And it was very expensive. So what did I do? Over the years, every time I would go to Israel for school or to take a tour, whatever I was doing, I would pick up another piece. And so over the years, it was like a collection challenge. And so I didn't have to lay out all that cash at one time, but it became a fun thing to do, to begin looking for those pieces as I could afford them, as I had the opportunity. And so my older pieces, my cheaper pieces, I keep those. And you can set it up differently for the special Sabbath. Like the feast days, you might want to go with bright reds, maybe for the Feast of Trumpets. If you've got some pretty greens or springy colors, you might want to do that for your Passover week. All sorts of different things. Different challah covers. If you can quilt a little bit or sew a little bit, which I can't, but keep your scraps, and you can make the most creative colors for the challah or the bread. Because typically on Shabbat, you're going to have a loaf of bread, special bread called challah, and you're going to have a cup of grape juice or wine for special blessings for the Shabbat. And so you could make all kinds of challah covers and change them out every week. You could have a different one each week of the month. And what you're going to see is when you eat your 3 meals on Shabbat, it's going to look like a big garden full of flowers if you're creative. And there's special things you can do for the day, just spontaneous things that, no, they're not commandments. It's just you taking joy and setting special things aside, reminding yourself this is a holy day. It's not like other days. So what can I do? One thing I did years ago is I've got, shower gel or whatever that I use for the regular days of the week. And then I've got a special one I just use on Shabbat. That may not work out if you've got lots of bottles of shampoo and shower gel or stuff with kids. But this is one way you can really get kids involved. You can ask them, what could we do to set apart the Shabbat? Maybe it is let them pick out a special kind of soap, a special pillowcase, maybe that they want for Shabbat, maybe a special toothbrush that they want to use on Shabbat, a special kind of toothpaste. I've said, like, I didn't realize now, but apparently you can go down the aisle at the store and there's a whole aisle full of toothpaste. I didn't realize you could do that. What about a special toy that you only bring out on Shabbat? Get the kids involved. They're very creative. How about set up a jigsaw puzzle? Some families enjoy doing jigsaw puzzles. In the winter months, that can be fun. You only work on it on Shabbat. Maybe you can do a whole puzzle on Shabbat, or maybe it takes you several weeks to finish that puzzle on Shabbat. If it's good weather, why not go on a hike? If it's warm, just go on a family hike. You've got congregational activities. If you can find a fellowship of like-minded believers, then that really helps your children, because you're going to want to start hedging out a lot of the activities that feels like it's done on purpose, like all the sports for your kids. They're wanting to pile that on to Saturdays. Even as old as I am, when I was in school, rarely did we have a Saturday basketball tournament. It pretty much had to get done Monday through Friday. Nowadays, they just pack those weekends up. All other kinds of, the quiz bowls, any sort of competition, outing, or whatever group your kids are associated with, they're going to try to pack that stuff into the Shabbat to detract from the holiness of Shabbat. And so if you can go to a congregation where there's lots of other kids who are also keeping Shabbat, then they don't feel so much like the rest of the world is doing something else, and then we're just sitting right here keeping Shabbat. Well, put them in an area, and you have to work sometimes to find a good congregation like that. But if they can do their family and congregational activities with other folks who have, begun to shut these doors to competing secular activities, it'll be a little harder to lure them outside of that Shabbat garden as they get older. What did Yeshua say? Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how many times I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not. Well, what does Jerusalem represent? The place where Israel went up to celebrate the feast. They went up to celebrate the high Sabbaths. And he wants you to come to the Sabbath. And we don't want him to say the same thing of us, as we go into the millennial reign, and we'll run into Yeshua and say, hey, Yeshua. We don't want him to say, how many times I would have gathered you, and you would not. And so now you want to enter in to this day that's all Shabbat? How prepared are you? You sure you don't want to go to a soccer game? You sure you don't want to go shopping? No, Yeshua, I want to be with you. Well, you didn't act like it. I kept calling you. I kept trying to gather you on Shabbat, but you were just busy. You had too many other things to do. You didn't really find delight in my day. You're going to find it delightful now? Those are hard questions. Those are things to think about before we get there, right? And you can't necessarily say that to your children exactly that way, but you as a parent, you know how to talk to them about it so that you're planting that seed in their hearts of wanting to do what Yeshua did, and realizing that so many of these activities we do, they have a shelf life. They won't go into eternity. They won't have any eternal meaning either. And so as you grow closer to Yeshua, often what you'll find out is that if you're listening to the Holy Spirit, little by little, you start to shed things. And you say, well, these weren't sins. No, they weren't. But they just consume time that Yeshua would rather spend with you. Right? It's like Yeshua saying, hey, can you come over to my house? And you're like, no, I think we've got a basketball game today. No, the Cowboys are playing today. Which I don't think they ever play on Saturday, but maybe in the playoffs or something. But we don't want to have that conversation. No, I was a little too busy on Shabbat, Yeshua. I had some other stuff to do with the kids. Don't give that answer, okay? You're learning. You'll make mistakes. Like I said, you'll make mistakes. But start to get your mind into that mindset. Set your heart and your mind on things eternal, not games that we won't remember next week. And will it feel awkward? Yes, it will. The first time you keep a Shabbat, it will feel very awkward. Just as awkward as it's going to feel maybe out there mowing the grass on Sunday when all your neighbors are driving to church. It's okay. It's not that the commandment is wrong or awkward. It's just that we are awkward as we begin to obey it. And you give yourself a few weeks, you'll be right into the groove right there. And you'll become more and more creative with the things that you can do. It might be a special hand towel, a special way that you set up your coffee, tea, or cocoa service on your counter for Shabbat. For me, I have a lot of friends who have given me little, hand towels like Shabbat Shalom, kitchen is closed at Shabbat. They got little messages on there. And I love those little towels because they remind me of the person that gave them to me. And so we'll make sure we use one of those little special hand towels, and we only use those on Shabbat to remind us of those special people who also keep Shabbat. You'll figure it out. And like I said before, one of the biggies in terms of boundaries, like don't do that, is don't kindle a fire. That's the literal commandment. There's lots of traditions we can keep. If they help make the day special, that's fine. But there's actual literal commandments. Bake what you're going to bake, boil what you're going to boil. Fix your food ahead of time. Going along with it, it says don't kindle a fire. And that's why you want to go ahead and bake what you're going to bake and boil what you're going to boil by the time the sun goes down on Friday. We don't want to set the garden on fire, do we? Nope, we don't want any forest fires. So If you need the candle lighting times, again, you can go to Hebraic Roots Network. You can buy a calendar, or you can look at a Jewish calendar, and it will have suggestions based on the area where you live. They call it candle lighting times, but the candle lighting times, it gives you about 18 minutes before the actual sundown. So when you light the candles, you're like, okay, now I know we can start Shabbating. That's important because once you light those candles, then you know you're not going to mess with the fire anymore until sundown on Saturday. What else would make it special? Well, maybe scented candles, maybe lighting scented candles. But it's important, if you are going to light candles, make sure you do it before sundown. Because, see, lighting candles is a tradition, and it's a good one, but it's a tradition. It's lighter than the commandment not to kindle a fire. So if you're going to light candles, light them before sundown. If you forget, it's okay. It's okay if you didn't light candles. It's fine. You can go through Shabbat without lit candles, but you don't want to go through Shabbat lighting candles, all right? And then there's the spiritual. Remember, he said there's a spiritual aspect to Shabbat that often we forget because we get caught up in the practicalities. But it's about the spirit of Shabbat. How can you carry that on? Emotional fires, right? That's why I say, if you can, shut down your technology as much as possible, because, social media can be an encourager, but it can also start a lot of fires. It can start you thinking about things. It can set your mind on fire. It can set your heart on fire. And we should refrain from starting those fires on Shabbat. So kind of limit what you're exposing yourself to if you know that in the past it has started emotional fires. If it's made you upset, if it's made you angry, just shut those doors, because you can. It's your Shabbat. You decide what happens on your Shabbat. You don't want to get in a hurry. There's different things you can do. Like you say, well, how am I going to boil if I want to make cocoa? If I want to make coffee, what do you do? There's all sorts of things you can do. Again, if you'll go back and you'll click again on the link, they'll give you some ideas about a hot water urn that'll hold your water warm all during Shabbat. You can make tea. You can make coffee. You can make hot cocoa. And again, save your best teas and coffees for Shabbat. You can also get a stovetop warmer that'll hold that food warm for you during Shabbat. There's all sorts of ideas, and they don't just decorate the Shabbat. They're very practical at helping you keep the commandments of Shabbat. But the most important thing, I think, is to be kind, to be compassionate like Yeshua was on Shabbat. He would even heal on Shabbat and say, this is heavier. And so you can give charity. There's something called a tzedakah box. And so as you say your blessings, over the bread and the wine before that, you can have this little charity box and have your children drop some coins into that charity box. Just have an eye for creativity, and you'll beautify it.